Okay, so I'm gonna go over I'm gonna talk about the psychology of successful rappers. All right, and some may consider this to be like a bad thing. Some may consider it a good thing. I'm just more so trying to go over it from a just like a straight up perspective, right? Basically, I'm getting into the mental traits, the tactics, and mindsets that separate, top rappers from, local rappers and, rappers who don't make it and all that kind of stuff. Now, in the psychology that I'm discussing, it's not really just relative to the like top 10 rappers like, Kendrick Lamar, NBA YoungBoy, Drake and all them. It's I guess you could say it's like the best way to put it is like basically the higher they rank, the more heavy these traits are, or the more dense this psychology is, right? So the the thing that's like kind of the main point of this is that talent alone isn't the main thing that makes rappers successful, right? The other side of the coin is understanding the mental game of it, and usually mastering any kind of game requires a particular mentality to it, right? It's almost similar to like how the best NBA players or whatever sport you can name, the guys who are on top of that, like Tom Brady, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, or going back to Michael Jordan, right? How they had a particular mindset, right, that made them master the game and become champions, right? It's a similar kind of thing. Now, something important to understand in this is what's called the dark triad traits, right? Because it's very core to what I'm getting across here. Now, according to Google, or a lot of psychological books, right? The dark triad comprises of three socially malevolent personality traits, that being narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, which is characterized by manipulation, callousness, and grandiosity. So, narcissism is marked by grandiosity, pride, egotism, and a lack of empathy. Narcissists have an inflated, self important view of themselves and crave admiration, right? Now, that's not saying that every rapper is a complete narcissist, but there has to be a bit of a narcissist to you. I know this as a rapper myself, right? And I guess I will know this more and more depending on what happens in the road that I'm going on in trying to be a successful rapper myself, right? But from that, I know factually myself that there's a bit of at least a tiny fraction of narcissism that you have to have, right, to even go about trying to do it, much less be successful with it, right? Then you have Machiavellianism, right? Some may remember that Tupac had referred to himself as Machiavelli and had an album that he called, I think it was called Kill Illuminati, Machiavelli, the 7 Day Theory, something like that, right? But the term comes from what was his name? Niccolo Machiavelli. I can't remember exactly what his official position was. I could look it up on Google right now, but I'm trying to just go off the head a little bit. But Machiavelli, he lived like back in like the Middle Ages, and he was like a politician, and I think he was in like Italy during like the Middle Ages and stuff like that. So, but basically, I think it was during the Renaissance period, if I'm not mistaken. If not, maybe a little bit before, right? But basically, Machiavelli, he's famous for a book that he made that's called The Prince, and it's basically the precursor to books like 48 Laws of Power, right? That was like one of the main inspirations for that book, the book written by Machiavelli called The Prince, right? So, and the book basically was like him detailing the reality of being a ruler and the game of being a ruler that needs to be understood within the mind and how to make it to the top, right? And those same principles that Machiavelli talked about and discussed in those books, you know, they were looked upon for like forevermore since those times when he had wrote it, because basically, the level of status and power that was being played with in regards to who he wrote the book for, right? if that can be applied to that level of power, everything else below it applies as well, right? So basically, in a certain sense, the most extreme strategy can work well in a simple game, right? So, and that's where the term Machiavellianism comes from. It's a tongue twisty word, but Machiavellianism involves manipulation, exploitation of others, a cynical disregard for morality, and a focus on self interest and deception. They are strategic and they use insincere flattery to get their way, right? And now, this doesn't mean that every single rapper or is, Machiavellian, but they have to have a little bit of that to them. They have to understand how to play the game, how to maneuver, right? How to play the crowd, how to play the audience, understanding the importance of their reputation and audience perception, right? Understanding their place within the realm of the rap game, and their relation to other rappers around them, and their relation to the streets if they're a street rapper, or their relation to conscious audiences if they're a conscious rapper, right? As they would call it, right? So after that, you have psychopathy. Psychopathy is characterized by enduring antisocial behavior, impulsivity, selfishness, remorselessness, and low empathy, right? This is the darkest of the dark triad traits, right? Now, yet again, this doesn't mean that every rapper is completely a psychopath, right? But they have to have a little bit of those traits to them, right? And like I mentioned before with narcissism, I myself, as a rapper, I do have a little bit of all these traits to me, right? Now, in regards to how extreme any of these traits are within me, well, that's my secret to keep, and for and for anybody listening to find out in the future. By then, it will be too late. I'm just kidding. Okay, but so basically, these three components of the dark triad are very important, right? In regards to understanding what I'm getting at, in regards to the psychology of successful rappers, right? Now, in regards to narcissism, right? Almost every top rapper, right? Whether it's Kendrick Lamar, NBA YoungBoy, Kanye West, Drake, right? No matter which one you name, they all, in some kind of way, big themselves up, right? Whether it's them bigging themselves up as being the most creative, uh, whether they big themselves up as being the best rapper, having the best lyrics, right? Whether they big themselves up as being the biggest gangster, having the biggest guns, catching the most bodies, right? They're the point of the narcissism, because it kind of has to do with what hip hop is rooted in and where it comes from, right? Because hip hop was built off of the, well, I'm not going to go into the whole history of music leading up into hip hop. I'm just going to start right kind of like where rap begins. But rap is very rooted in, battle rapping, right? And freestyling. That was very integral early on in, like, the late 70s, early 80s and all that, right? Even going into the 90s, right? Freestyling and lyrics was very important, right? But the kind of the point of it was, it works differently than most other forms of music, right? Because in other forms of music, there wasn't a thing really where you would be looked at a certain way if you got to the level of being braggadocious as a rapper. I think the only musician before rappers, I guess then this is technically why he's considered like the first rapper that kind of did that, would be James Brown in some of his songs, like how he would big himself up, right? But basically, a lot of hip hop is built on that, and the reason why narcissism has to come into play is because you have to be able to examine yourself and look at what's the greatest thing about you to put you over your competition, right? Like, you hear quite a few hip hop commentators will call hip hop a competitive sport, and that's where that kind of comes into play, right? So, but the narcissism, it's an important trait for successful rappers to have, right? Because you have to have that image of yourself and that level of self importance in order to be able to promote yourself, right? Like, there's stories about Kanye West before he was even known, right? When he was just more so known as a producer, where he would go to rappers who were like known in the streets and connected with the streets and look them dead in their face and say, "You need my beats," right? Like to the point where some of them would even think like, listen, if this dude beats suck, we gonna beat him up. And of course, as we all know, Kanye West would play his beats, and they'd be like, okay, he wasn't lying. We do need his beats, right? So even in the aspect of because like I said, like it doesn't just come in the form of like street rappers, because usually people mostly probably relate that kind of thing to street rappers, but I think Kanye West is probably a clear example to everybody that that doesn't just apply to street rappers, right? So and even say like early on with Drake, right? Because Drake's early music, it wasn't more like his recent music where he's more so about bigging himself up as like the biggest artist in the game or whatever, right? Drake's earlier music was more based in vulnerability, but it took a level of narcissism for him to turn the lens on himself and push it out in the way that he did, right? Where his whole thing was like, there's so many of these rappers faking. I make great music and I'm myself, right? So that's kind of like the thing of his thing with it, right? In regards to narcissism. Now, I kind of want to skip over Machiavellianism because I feel like that's the most important trait, because I feel like that trait is the difference between rappers who kind of like are never successful and the ones that are like middle of the road. I feel like they have like less Machiavellianism than the rappers who get to the top, right? So as a matter of fact, I will. So I'm gonna go on to psychopathy slash fearlessness, and now I'm gonna go back to Machiavellianism, right? Now I say psychopathy slash fearlessness because you have to really think about it. If you look at any successful rapper and go to the beginning of their career, or just look up the story about the beginning of the career, every single one of them had to be a bit crazy. They had to be a bit of a psycho to even have the belief in themselves. Because in a certain sense, I think the if we're talking about like the order of these, I guess you could say these mental blocks that led to them being able to be successful, the psychopathy probably had to come first within them, right? Because the psychopathy is what made the narcissism work better for them. And then the psychopathy and the narcissism is what leads to the Machiavellianism, right? And all these traits necessary for success, not just within the realm of rap, I think in a lot of different realms, right? Of life, period. That's why Machiavelli wrote the book, of The Prince, right? And to look at things in the point blank period fashion that Machiavelli proposed within that book, you probably do have to have a bit of psycho to you. You have to have a bit of narcissism to you, right? To figure out and unlock the Machiavellianism within your mind, right? So the psychopathy is, it's the willingness to risk everything, right? Willingness to risk your street cred, the willingness like Kanye West to go in front of gangsters and tell them like, listen, y'all music whack, y'all need my beats, right? Embracing controversy and bad things, right? Even the if you even look at the because there's people who look at, like, for instance, the situation with Drake and Kendrick Lamar, and some people look at Drake's side of it and wonder, because in hindsight everything's 2020, but a lot of people kind of like look at it and think like, okay, why did Drake bother doing that? Why did he want to participate in it? It basically, this is the simplest way and kind of how I see it sometimes, right? If Drake had the kind of mind and the kind of heart to not participate in that rap beef, or the exchange that him and Kendrick Lamar had that ended in Not Like Us, right? The If Drake didn't have the kind of mind to participate in that with Kendrick Lamar, he probably never would have succeeded in being a rapper to begin with, right? There has to be a level of psychopathy and fearlessness, right? Being able to risk it, being willing to put out records that your engineer looks at you and says, hey, you probably shouldn't put this out, right? Having the willingness to play songs for people that make them go, wait, what'd you just say, right? So, and also this kind of like ties into the high stakes living of a lot of rappers. A lot of the drug taking, a lot of the kind of lifestyles that rappers are known for, right? And even say with a rapper that has more of a cleaner image, say like a Kendrick Lamar, there's still a psychoness to him. If you even hear the stories about how he was obsessed with writing, they said this man kept notebooks upon note. They said he had multiple notebooks that he would keep. this this dude is like insane when it comes to writing raps, right? And 50, I've seen an interview with 50 Cent saying a similar thing about Eminem. That like there's Eminem is just like crazy when it comes to being in the studio and working on his raps. He said, "Is anything else you could probably have a chance at beating Eminem at? You're never gonna beat him at that, just because of how obsessed he is with that, right?" So the psychopathy, I think it is very necessary for there to be success as a rapper. And it's probably kind of what leans into the reason why you see a lot of guys from the streets end up going into it, and why there's quite a few successful rappers who were actually in the streets, right? So next, I want to get into, and this is, like I said, I think this is the most important one. This is why I saved this for last: Machiavellianism, right? Because there's plenty of guys. I'm pretty sure everybody can go on Instagram and go to one of those pages like Say Cheese, and you can see a whole bunch of rappers who are, when I say mid tier, guys with like somewhere like 50 to like 200,000 followers on social media and all that. Like they're popular enough that there's people who know them, but like people around you might not know them, but people know them through the internet and people who are fans of theirs and stuff like that, right? But I think the thing that's the difference between which of those rappers in that like range, which ones make it up into the upper echelon of rappers who are actually making money versus the ones that stay there, I think is this trait here: Machiavellianism, right? Their willingness and their ability to manipulate, right? And manipulation, it's not always, the word manipulation has a negative connotation to it, but manipulation is not always a bad thing, right? Because even say, for instance, look at a lot of people look at Kendrick Lamar's "Not Like Us" song. They look at it in a fashion as if like that he was exposing Drake for the better, that he's trying to expose things that should be pushed out of the hip hop landscape, that should be pushed away from it, right? So, in a certain sense, he is trying to manipulate how things are working. He is trying to manipulate how things are going, right? In a certain sense, he is trying to place a certain block in the mind of a lot of the hip hop audience that was observing that event, right? That, from that point on, if they see Drake do certain things, they see it a certain way, right? If they see certain artists do certain things that Drake did, they make those mental connections, right? That is mental manipulation, right? Now, like I said, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It just depends on how you look at it. Now, also, Machiavellianism includes strategic deception and long game planning, right? Like, so basically, strategic deception is basically, you have rappers, they may look at the whole landscape of other rappers. They may like not even really like 20 or 30 of the other rappers who are like within their range, right, of popularity. But for the sake of advancing their career, they may look and say, okay, I got to do a song with him. I got to do a song with him. I want to link up with that producer, but me and that rapper don't really get along well. Maybe there's a way I could get that producer away from him. Okay, da 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 da, right? Like there, and or even say, for instance, rappers who get ghostwriters, right? Uh, so there's there's a lot of planning that goes in regards to how there's a lot of planning involved in regards to what makes rappers stick around, right? It's not as simple as them just putting out a hot song, right? Because you have rappers that get hot on TikTok, they get hot off a song, they go and they do a couple of shows, they make a little bit of money, and boom, they disappear, right? The difference between the ones that disappear and stay, as I already mentioned, are the ones who understand how to play the crowd, right? Because say for instance, XXX Tentacion, right? When when he first was coming up, right? I think he had said this in like in interviews, right? He understood that people, particularly through the internet, gravitate, right? Like flies to crap, right? Like flies on dung. People fly to negativity, right? Especially during the era where World Star Hip Hop was a hot website and a platform, right? So basically, he was saying he understood that he had to kind of use negativity and negative energy and negative things in order to attract people to his sphere, in order to get people to look at him, right? Even his first single that he blew up with, which was called "Look at Me," right? And remember, as I already said, psychopathy, narcissism, right? And that kind of, in a certain sense, that song was kind of taking advantage of that whole aspect of things, right? But basically, he had all this raucous kind of energy, right? That he was known for. He The whole thing happened where Drake allegedly took a song from him. Uh, the song actually does sound quite a bit like the song. I won't. I'll talk about that at a later time. That's a whole nother thing to get into. But that's for another video. But basically, there was the whole thing with Drake, where Drake allegedly stole the his whole flow and cadence from the song. It was a song that Drake did with the British rapper. I think his name was Giggs, right? But basically, when that happened, XXXTentacion didn't like it at all, and it was the kind of thing where it happened to other artists before, where Drake allegedly took work from them, but the artist just didn't make a big deal out of it, kind of out of fear of kind of going at the biggest artist in the game and getting blackballed and all that kind of stuff, right? But XXXTentacion, how he saw it was like, either way, my life will be screwed, right? He didn't foresee the way how his career was going to end up going, right? So it's almost similar to like what 50 Cent said about when he had did the How to Rob song. For those who don't know, 50 Cent, he got popular early on before before he got signed by Eminem and Dr. Dre, from a song he had made called How to Rob, where he was basically rapping about robbing every like popular rapper in the game, right? And so, and basically 50 Cent's explanation of it was that he wasn't scared to do it, because even if any rapper had an issue with it and wanted him dead or wanted to fight him or whatever, he was facing that same kind of action in the streets anyways. So how he saw it, it was like, well, it's either I have these same problems in the streets or I'm going to have these same problems in the rap game. I might as well diss everybody, right? It was a similar thing that XXXTentacion was expressing in regards to what happened with him and the whole Drake situation, right? So, but here's where his Machiavellianism comes into play. So that whole thing happened, then that turned into Offset from the Migos, right? He had said some kind of thing about X, in regards to, like, he was basically saying like, oh, like, who the hell are you? Like, what makes, I'm paraphrasing, but Offset was basically kind of like saying like, what makes you think somebody as big as Drake is even looking at you, right? Now, ironically, as Offset was saying this, he was wearing a hoodie that was XXXTentacion's merchandise, right? Like this, you can't make this up. You can, I'm not joking. You can look this up. This really happened, right? But Offset, ironically, was wearing a hoodie that was X's merchandise, right? So that kind of made X double down, and most people, right, particularly a rapper, because X was not a street rapper. He was not a gangster rapper of the ilk of like NBA YoungBoy and Kodak Black. He was more so on the, like, the regular. He's not like a conscious rapper. There's songs that he has that could be considered conscious, but he was more of like a everyman kind of musician, right? He made all kind of music, right? But he was seen as like a regular rapper. Like, he was kind of seen as like, on the punk side of things, like he was soft or whatever, right? XXXTentacion proceeded to scathingly talk about the Migos, right? Calling them out their names, all kind of FUs, and right? He did not care. And that turned into him running into the Migos in LA. And the Migos, one thing or another happened, and according to XXXTentacion, that he got jumped. But XXXTentacion went on Instagram and posted a video with all the swells on his head from the encounter that he had with the Migos, right? And according to him, nobody gave him the faith of a one-on-one. He would have preferred if they gave him a one-on-one fight, right? Or somebody at least, right? But they all just, it seemed like, according to him, that he got jumped, right? But basically, XXXTentacion, he took that situation and turned tragedy into triumph, right? Because he used that to keep bolstering and getting attention to his name. And the quiet kept secret that really only, I guess, him and maybe people who are fans of his at that time knew, XXXTentacion was actually very, very good at making music, right? He's actually very good. So, and not only that, he was good at making different kinds of music and going into different modes and different moods, right? Because remember, as I said with this, I know I seem to be going on a whole different like wind here, but Machiavellianism, it involves manipulation, strategic deception, and a long game planning, right? So XXXTentacion took what he referred to as the clout tokens or free clout, right? He took the energy of this situation and he completely flipped it on its head by putting out his album 17, which was filled with songs like Jocelyn Flores that were more like on the softer side, right? Songs that were more introspective, songs that were more personal, right? He took that narcissism of look at me and he completely flipped it on its head, right? It was almost like that same guy that was screaming saying look at me, he took you home into his dark room and started telling you secrets about himself, right? And it was a real smart move because it kind of hit people in a different way and it let people see a different side to him, right? It kind of made it because you want to know how it kind of made him come off as. It's almost like when you're at school, right? And there's that crazy kid who's always getting into fights with people and stuff like that. But then one day you catch him at lunch when he's in like a more cool mood, right? And he asks you for $1 for a pizza, and before you give him the dollar, you start asking him certain questions, and he tells you to follow him into the lunch line or whatever. And you're in the lunch line with him. He's just telling you about his life. He's telling you about stuff with his mom and all this kind of stuff. He's telling you about the bad situations he's in. He's telling you about everything that led up to that fight that you saw him in. And then you start sitting there thinking like, yo, he's actually kind of cool, right? I've met kids like that at school, right? Who at first glance you thought they were like crazy or they're off kilter because you see them in a fight, but you smoke some weed with them or something like that. And you're like, oh, you're actually a cool person, right? So, and this is why I said where the strategic deception, right? I wouldn't call this like deception, maybe more so manipulation, right? But as I said, manipulation it could be a good or a bad thing, right? But the point of the manipulation was not X coming out with the 17 album and showing his softer side. The manipulation was using negativity to grab the attention, right? Long game planning came into play with him knowing that he wanted to put out something like that, but he needed more attention before he put out something like that, right? Right? Like the rappers who end up succeeding, they excel at the chess game of the industry, right? Beefs for clout, the label politics, subliminal disses, and all that kind of stuff. Alliances that they form with other rappers that end up getting dropped when it's the most convenient, right? So that's why I said like that's the most important, right? Now, there's other dark psychological elements that drive success, right? Like the shadow self and repression, right? I think if you look at it, all the rappers who like are in the top, they don't, because even among the gangster rappers, right? The most successful gangster rappers, such as NBA YoungBoy, Kodak Black, right? They when they stay around, right? Because they can reach a good level, right? But the 21 Savages and Lil Babies of the world, they don't really stick to people the way how NBA YoungBoy and Kodak Black do, right? And I think it's because a lot of their music, like Lil Baby's music, is a lot more stunty, buy a bag, buy a girl a Birkin, spending money, buying cars, right? Just street stuff. 21 Savage, a lot of his music is really shoot 'em up, kill, shoot 'em up, kill, shoot 'em up, kill, stab, shoot 'em up. It's a knife, kill, right? I'm not trying to be offensive to either of them. I'm just basically trying to explain a concept and how fans stick to and glue to people, right? But there's a softer side of themselves, like the same way how I said XXXTentacion gave the softer side of himself, and that made people stick to him. It's a similar thing with Kodak and NBA YoungBoy. They don't just do raps where it's just street. They do have those songs, definitely, right? But they give a whole other side of them that's a lot more personal, where it almost feels like they came and picked you up in the Lamborghini and they're telling you about their day and what's going on in their life, right? Where they're letting you know, like, listen, despite, me being a popular rapper, me getting this money, right? There's these street situations. I got dead homies I'm missing that I'm still crying about, right? I'm messing up with my girl. She mad at me about this. My baby mama tripping, right? Like, they bring you in this kind of way, right? And that is something that I noticed that's kind of like the key differentiator, right? When you look at the guys that glue to people, right? Because there's quite a few rappers that people can name who reach like the upper echelons or who get popular and stuff like that. But I'm talking about the ones that stick to the people and the difference. Because as I said before, all the rappers who achieve some item of success, even like the mid tier, rappers that are mostly known in their state and region, they have the traits of narcissism and psychopathy, but usually the ones who can't get out of there, they don't really understand the Machiavellian side to the game, right? And then now within the upper levels, now that's where these other aspects come into play. The shadow self and repression, as I already kind of went over, right? And now a couple of others would be hyper competitiveness and a zero sum mindset, right? Like rap is a battle culture at the core of it, right? So success kind of means standing out more than other people. It's the crowd looking at you and saying like, "Yo, he the best one, he the greatest one," right? Even rappers who are more towards the peaceful side, like the Kendricks and the Kanyes of the world, they still have a way of kind of like not necessarily like saying like other rappers or like soft or anything like that, but they have that thing where they kind of say like, listen, in this regard, none of these guys measure up, right? Like I remember Kanye West had a line where he said since Pac passed away, most you rappers don't even deserve a track from me, right? Where he was basically saying like since the death of Tupac, most rappers asking Kanye for beats, you don't deserve a Kanye beat, you're too whack for it, right? So there's still this hyper competitiveness to it no matter what aspect of rap you're going to, right? Then you have the emotional manipulation of fans, right? Where it's necessary for rappers to figure out how to build a parasocial bond, right? Extentacion would do that through just trying to reach out and talk to as many fans as possible. When he got bigger, he would more so try to do videos where he would generally try to push out his mind towards them, right? And now remember, like I said, manipulation comes with a negative connotation. But for this level of success, there needs to be a level of emotional manipulation involved, right? In the same way how, like with a sports star, say Tom Brady, right? When for Tom Brady to win all those Super Bowls that he has, he needs to know how to emotionally manipulate his teammates. He needs to know how to get in the head of all the left tackle and the right tackle, the guys blocking him in the center and all that, and make them like get in their heads and make it be understood. You're better off breaking your arm on this play than letting that guy get through and tackle me, right? I need to get this ball to the wide receiver, right? So it's a similar kind of thing in regards to rap and the emotional manipulation of the fans that is necessary to build that connection, to build that relationship. If you see how a lot of fans talk about their favorite rappers online, you would think these people sat down with them every single day. You would think these people, like, morning, noon, and night, they were calling Kendrick Lamar and saying, man, hey, Kendrick, what's going on, Kendrick? Right? These rappers don't know none of these people for the most part. Now, some of them do have, from what I remember, NBA YoungBoy has like some kind of like, it's like some kind of thing with Amazon, some kind of radio thing. I think it was called Amp Radio or something like that. But basically, something where he has fans that he connects with and that he actually does get to talk to, and they're like, "Oh my God, YoungBoy, I love you," right? And he just talks to them a little bit. It's like, "Thank you for that," da 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 da, right? I wouldn't say that's bad manipulation. No, that is a form of good manipulation because it's it's a thing where maybe some of the fans there, I'm pretty sure they're aware that, like, he's not going to remember them from a fly in the wall, right? But it's a way of him showing, like, his appreciation, right? Even though as soon as he gets off the line, he's not going to be thinking about this person, right? Maybe unless they told him something about their lives, like maybe their mother died or something like that. I'm sure young boy has enough of a heart that something like that would hit him, where he probably maybe sit down after like, damn, I got fans who going through something, right? But the thing is, though, it is something that is necessary for marketing and promotional reasons, right? Now, also, there's also addiction, hedonism, and self-destruction as fuel. Right now, this one should be pretty obvious. A lot of rappers lean into darker lifestyles for authenticity or creative edge. Right, some of the like rappers, like say like a Juice World, how heavily he leaned into drugs. Right, X and how heavily he leaned into, I guess you could say, depression and ideas like self harm and self deletion and stuff like that. Right, and those kind of feelings with even say somebody like Kendrick Lamar. He kind of on his album Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, he kind of took his own mistakes within his marriage and he used that as something to hold up, right? Then I would say after that you have calculated image and persona building, right? Which you know how like people like Eminem would have like a alter ego or like Kendrick Lamar with the Kung Fu Kenny thing, right? A lot of, and like, gangster rappers and how they make sure their street cred is important, right? And that they're 100% in the streets. All of that goes into play at the higher levels of that game, right? Now, you'll hear rappers a lot talk about how like it's lonely at the top, and I think a big part of it does have to do with them having to possess and master these traits, right? Particularly the Machiavellianism, because Machiavellianism, despite how necessary it is for success, for the majority of society, it kind of feels a little, I guess, not maybe sometimes fake or manipulative, right? And like I said, manipulation comes with a bad connotation for people, right? So those traits, they help these rappers climb the ladder, but it often leads to isolation, right? Paranoia, broken relationships, mental health crashes, right? Sometimes even legal issues. Many legends, they end up burning out. There are certain rappers who, when they get to the top, they can't stop taking drugs, or they have some kind of vice, right? Things like Narcan has been a vice of quite a few rappers recently. Percocets has been a vice of quite a few rappers recently, right? There's rappers who have died from drug overdoses, right? Suicide and things of that nature. So I guess the question that most people would ask is success worth the psychological toll, right? And I would say it depends, right? I would say it depends on the individual's ability to harness those traits, right? Because it's almost like fire, right? Fire can be used to warm your house, or it can be used to, uh, burn down a whole town, right? It can burn it down, or it can keep it warm. It can cook food, right? It depends on how you're harnessing that energy, right? So the dark psychology is not evil, right? But it is amplified, right, by the cutthroat game that hip hop is, right? But understanding it will show you exactly why the game is how it is, right? And maybe it's kind of a chicken or the egg kind of thing in regards to whether, you know, the hip hop game works this way because of how rappers are, or whether rappers are how they are because this is how the hip hop game is, right? But the bottom line truth is, if you look at all the rappers who are successful, no matter what genre of rap they're in, no matter what type of guy they are, every single one of them rank high in these traits.